Why had the ridge gone silent? And why did she feel, for the first time in years, the sting of being truly alone? The valley below roared with chaos, rifles cracking in violent rhythm, machine guns tearing the air apart, RPG backblasts punching fire into the afternoon light. But her ridge, the one piece of high ground the entire mission depended on, had gone dead. No radio call, no spotter's voice, no reassurance. Just the unnerving quiet of mountains older than war itself. Monica Blake kept her cheek pressed to the stock of her rifle, her breathing steady despite the pounding in her chest. She had felt fear before. She had learned to fold it neatly, tuck it behind professionalism, bury it beneath repetition and skill. But something about the silence today felt different, personal in a way battle shouldn't be. It had been 20 minutes since SEAL Team Echo got ambushed in that compound, 15 minutes since their perimeter had collapsed, 10 minutes since her spotter, Corporal Davis, took a sniper round through the shoulder and went limp beside her. She had dragged him backward, packed the wound, whispered lies she hoped would come true. "You'll be fine, you're not done yet, stay awake." Lies, yes, soft ones. Necessary ones. He had gone quiet too, but his chest was still rising. And that meant she was still responsible for him. Yet even as she glanced back to confirm he was breathing, her eyes kept pulling toward the valley, toward the men who were pinned, bleeding, trapped. 30 enemy fighters pushing from 3 directions. A machine gun nest on the ridge. A sniper in the tower. RPG teams rotating in rhythm. Mortar crews preparing their second tube. She registered every threat the way a mathematician reads a chalkboard, fast, precise, unblinking. And yet the numbers kept repeating in her mind in a way that made her stomach tighten. They don't have 20 minutes, they barely have 5. Her job had been simple: provide overwatch, call threats, engage if absolutely necessary, limit shots, maintain concealment. But rules written in clean offices had never accounted for this. Men bleeding out inside a collapsing mud compound, begging for air support that was still 20 minutes away. Monica swallowed, the taste of dust thick at the back of her throat. She could withdraw, stick to doctrine, guard her position, save her last magazines for self-preservation. Or she could do the thing she knew would get her reprimanded, maybe worse. She exhaled, slow and steady. There was no decision left to make. Her crosshairs settled on the PKM gunner laying into the SEALs from 780 meters away. She could see the rhythm of his shoulders, the burst pattern, the slight sway of his barrel under sustained fire. A predictable target, but distance and wind still mattered. She adjusted half a mil right, a touch higher, stopped breathing. Trigger press. The shot echoed against the stone around her, a single, controlled note amid the orchestra of battle. But in her world, the silence after the shot mattered more. The PKM stopped. A hole replaced the gunner's face. And somewhere inside the compound, a SEAL who thought he had seconds left to live gasped at the sudden quiet. Monica didn't wait to feel anything about it. Emotions were luxuries for later, when no one was dying. Her finger moved, her eyes shifted, her breathing reset. The RPG gunner on the rooftop was aligning his shot. She could tell from the stiffness in his shoulders. Rookie mistake. Good fighters loosened before firing. Bad ones got tense. Tension was always fatal under a competent scope. She fired. The rocket clattered to the roof unused as the gunner folded, body limp. The sniper in the tower was next. Harder shot. Only a sliver of forehead and part of a cheek visible behind chipped concrete. But he was patient, steady, methodical, exactly the kind she hated facing. She watched the rise and fall of his barrel, memorized the timing, waited for the half-second window when he shifted. She fired again. The sliver disappeared. Her heart didn't spike, her breathing didn't change, but somewhere deep in her chest, a buried voice whispered a truth she often denied. "You're too good at this, too good to walk away now." Enemy fighters hadn't realized yet. They thought the shots were flukes, coincidence, another team somewhere out of sight, but confusion was already spreading, rifles pausing, shouts rising, heads lowering. Good, fear made people sloppy. And sloppy people died fast. She continued working. Her hands moved with the precision of someone who had spent years training her body not to think, only to act. The mortar crew 850 meters away had just finished leveling their tube. She fired twice, gunner, assistant gunner. The tube fell sideways, useless. The machine gun nest to the east, 3 shots. The flanking fighters moving in coordinated bounds, 5 shots. An officer shouting orders behind partial cover, 1 round through mud brick. 32 rounds gone. 16 fighters down. Her rifle was hot now. The barrel shimmered with heat haze. Sweat trickled into her eyes. The air smelled of dust, cordite, and sun-baked earth. She blinked the sting away, ignoring the warmth rolling off the metal. Davis groaned behind her. She didn't turn. Couldn't. Every second lost meant someone in the compound bled more, prayed more, or died. But she found her voice. Soft, steady, the kind she only used with people she trusted. "Stay with me, Davis. I'm not done yet." Her radio crackled in Morrison's voice. "Unknown friendly sniper. If you're engaging those positions, identify." She didn't answer. Names didn't matter when men were dying. Her next reload was muscle memory. Magazine out, fresh one in, bolt release slapped, cheek weld restored. 3 seconds. She had practiced until 3 seconds felt like an eternity. A new threat emerged, 8 fighters pushing from the north with coordinated discipline. Not amateurs. These were trained, focused, intent on flanking the compound and her. 4 broke off, beginning to climb the slope beneath her. She could feel her pulse trying to rise. She pressed it down. Protect the SEALs first. Deal with the rest when you have to. Her breathing slowed to a rhythm she'd learned as a child on long-distance ranges with her father, steady, patient, unforgiving. Her world narrowed to crosshairs and movement. Shots. More shots. Rifles fell silent one after another. Then the whisper of dread she'd been suppressing finally surfaced, light, cold. "They know where you are now." But she didn't retreat. Didn't blink. Didn't breathe until every fighter with a clean angle on those SEALs was gone. The math was getting cruel. Ammunition low, enemy closing, her position compromised, Davis wounded. But math had never understood her. And when she settled her crosshairs again on the next threat building momentum in the valley, something in her chest hardened into resolve. She wasn't leaving that ridge. Not while they still needed her. Not while there was still 1 shot left to take. What made her pause, just for a breath, wasn't the gunfire or the heat or the rising certainty that enemy fighters were climbing toward her position. It was something quieter, a flicker of a memory she had worked hard to bury. Her father's voice. "Don't shoot to feel brave, Monica. Shoot because someone needs you." She blinked it away, hard. The battlefield wasn't a place for ghosts. But the ghosts kept whispering anyway. Below in the compound she saw movement, desperation, scrambling, wounded men being dragged toward cover that didn't exist. The SEAL team was down to minutes, maybe less. Their defenders had collapsed into pockets of resistance, trained men forced into survival mode. Monica could see their silhouettes flicker between the shattered walls, firing controlled bursts, trying to hold off the press of fighters surrounding them. But every time a SEAL shifted positions, enemy fire erupted like it had been waiting for that exact moment. She opened her mouth, not to speak, to steady herself. The ridge around her suddenly cracked with rounds snapping past. Too close, too fast, too deliberate. They were climbing toward her. She refocused her eyes through the scope. The fighters below, the ones directly threatening the SEALs, took priority. She drilled the lead fighter from the northern flank, then the second who dove behind a rock. Her shot caught him mid-movement, precisely where his shoulder blade angled upward. Another tried to disappear into a gully. She studied that gully for hours. She punished his mistake with a single round that hit so cleanly he dropped before his body realized it was dead. But the enemy wasn't stupid. They were learning her, studying her, adjusting with unnerving speed. 5 fighters split into flanking angles, disappearing behind terrain folds she couldn't cover simultaneously. She dropped another magazine, slammed in a fresh one. 3 magazines left, 60 rounds. Too few for the number of men still trying to kill the SEALs, and now her. Breathing steady, heart slow, but the pressure in her chest tightened with every passing second. Davis groaned. She didn't turn, but the sound tore at her composure. He needed extraction. He needed a medic, and she needed to stay alive long enough to give him that chance. Her rifle barked again, 3 rapid shots. Targets went still. For a moment, only a moment, there was the briefest lull. A soft pause in battle, like the world took a breath after screaming too long. Then the fighters climbing beneath her opened up. Automatic fire chewed into the rocks near her position, sharp cracks, chips of stone slicing her cheek. Their volume was wrong, too close, too deliberate, too synchronized. They knew exactly where she was. A whisper of fear crept along her spine. It was small, thin, almost polite, but it was there. She pressed it down. Her choice was simple: protect the SEALs or protect herself. She chose them. Her rifle switched angles, dropping onto the fighters climbing toward her. They were 300 meters out now, and at that distance the SR-25 wasn't precision, it was punishment. 3 rounds. 3 bodies tumbling down the ridge, limbs loose, rifles clattering against stone. The remaining fighters adapted instantly, splitting apart, bounding from cover to cover, pushing toward her in ways that reminded her uncomfortably of her own training. These weren't amateurs. They were disciplined, trained, hungry. This fight was no longer between an Overwatch sniper and distant targets. This had become personal. She shot one as he sprinted between boulders, another as he attempted to peek over a rock, a third who thought he had a clean line on her. Her rifle locked empty again. 2 magazines left. 40 rounds. She reloaded, her hands moving with the memory of 1,000 repetitions, each motion fluid, thoughtless, necessary. Then over the radio, Morrison's voice cut through the chaos. "We are moving to extraction point Alpha. Whoever you are, your fire is saving us." She wanted to respond, wanted to say just survive, or get your wounded clear, or even the truth. "I don't know if I'll make it off this ridge." But she didn't speak. Talking stole seconds. Seconds killed people. She instead shifted her scope toward the compound's exit route. 5 enemy positions still able to fire directly onto the SEALs as they attempted withdrawal. 5 positions she had to solve immediately or wounded men would die in the dirt. Her breath vanished. Her mind sharpened. She slipped into that strange, unsettling clarity snipers rarely spoke about, the place where time stretched, where noise quieted, where decisions felt predestined. Shot. Recoil. Silence. Shot. Recoil. Falling body. Wind call. Hold. Shot. The world blurred around her, but her focus tunneled to a single darting heartbeat: purpose. The exit route cleared. And then behind her, she heard the unmistakable backblast thump of an RPG launch. Her blood ran cold. She didn't think. She didn't breathe. She dove sideways, the explosion ripping through her hide with a violent concussion that punched the air out of her lungs. Rocks hammered into her back and shoulders. Her ears rang like shrapnel inside her skull. She tasted dust and copper. Monica hit the ground behind a larger boulder, instincts firing faster than conscious thought. She brought her rifle up just as 3 fighters descended the ridge toward her, close, too close. 50 meters. They assumed she was dead. They assumed wrong. 4 rounds, fast, aggressive, precise. 3 bodies dropped so quickly they never knew where the shots came from. Her magazine clicked empty. 1 magazine left. 20 rounds. And then voices, more fighters closing, surrounding. They were hunting her now. Her hands shook, not from fear, but from the adrenaline dump of being targeted rather than observing. A sniper stripped from distance loses her greatest weapon, time. But she still had one thing left. Purpose. She checked on Davis, still breathing, still unconscious. She dragged herself toward him, torn between duty and instinct. That's when the radio cracked alive again. Rescue 6-1 inbound to extract SEAL Team Echo, taking heavy fire from the ridge. RPGs and machine guns. We cannot land. She peered over the ridge, vision blurred but functional. And she saw them. Enemy fighters she hadn't been able to engage earlier, waiting, hidden, disciplined, now firing everything they had at the helicopter that carried the last hope of wounded men. 20 rounds left. Her position compromised. Enemy closing. Davis bleeding. But something in her, something quiet, unyielding, stubborn, rose through the chaos. She stood, found a new firing angle, slapped in her last magazine, and whispered to herself with a voice steadier than her heartbeat, "I won't let them die." Her rifle roared. RPG teams dropped their weapons mid-aim. The PKM nest stopped its spray of tracer fire in a sudden, violent halt. Fighters trying to flank the birds scattered as rounds punched through their cover. Monica fired with the desperation of someone who had run out of choices. 20 rounds. 20 heartbeats. 20 chances to save men she had never met. She used everyone. Her bolt locked open. She was empty, and enemy fighters were already charging toward her through the smoke. The click of her empty rifle bolt felt louder than the gunfire below. Empty, dry, final. The sound that meant every comfort of distance and precision had just been stripped away. And the fighters charging toward her knew it. She could hear them shouting, too close, too confident, too eager for the kill. Their voices carried the rhythm of men who believed they had finally cornered the invisible threat that had been tearing their ranks apart. They were right about one thing. She wasn't invisible anymore. Monica abandoned the SR-25, leaving it cooling in the dirt, its metal still hot from the last desperate volley. She pulled her Glock from its holster, 3 magazines, 45 rounds. That was the sum of her world now. A pistol, a wounded spotter, and hostile fighters closing from multiple angles on a ridge that had turned from sanctuary to trap. She moved fast, low, calculated. Her boots slid across loose stone, her lungs burning from dust and the concussion of the RPG. She grabbed Davis by his vest and dragged him deeper behind the boulder, shielding him with terrain he'd never thank her for, because he might not live to see it. But she wasn't ready to accept that outcome. Not while she could still fight. The first fighter rounded the rock 20 meters away. Her pistol barked twice. He folded instantly, momentum carrying him sideways into the dirt. "Keep coming," she whispered, her voice barely audible over her own breathing. "I'm not done." 2 more fighters emerged on the ridge above her. They fired in controlled bursts, careful, methodical, men who knew how to suppress and flank. She ducked, stones exploding near her temple, dust showering her shoulders. She rose just enough to return fire 2 shots, forcing them back without dropping them. Not yet. She moved, sliding across uneven ground, her shoulder cracking against a jagged outcrop. Pain flared sharp, unwelcome, but she swallowed it. Pain was irrelevant. Survival wasn't. The fighters closed from both sides now, their footsteps on gravel, their reloading clicks. The tense silence between bursts of fire. They were communicating, coordinating through instinct more than language. They wanted her pinned, and for several seconds they almost succeeded. She dropped behind another boulder, chest heaving, listening to her heartbeat thrum in her ears. She had maybe 30 rounds left. Maybe 30 seconds before they reached her. She keyed her radio with shaking fingers. Morrison, I am pinned. Wadi, 500 meters north of compound. Multiple hostiles. Ammunition critical. The SEAL commander didn't hesitate. Roger, we're turning the bird around. Apache gunship is 60 seconds out. Mark your position. 60 seconds. It might as well have been 60 years. But she didn't argue. She reached into her vest, pulled out an IR strobe. Her fingers trembled, not from fear, but from exhaustion, from everything she'd held together for far too long. She activated the beacon, pressed it on a flat rock behind her, and ducked. Strobe active, she whispered. Her voice sounded foreign. Enemy north 50 meters. The radio crackled with the calm precision of a pilot who knew the destruction he was about to unleash. Apache has visual, engaging. What followed didn't sound like gunfire. It sounded like judgment. The 30 chain gun erupted in a sound that shook the ridge, that vibrated in Monica's bones, that drowned out every other noise on the mountain. High-explosive rounds tore into the wadi ahead of her, shredding stone, sweeping through defensive positions with mechanical brutality. One moment the fighters were advancing. The next, they were scattering, diving, disappearing under the rain of fire. Dust surged like a collapsing wave. The ground trembled under her palms. Pebbles danced across her forearms. She crouched low, shielding Davis with her body as shrapnel pinged off the rocks around them. Targets destroyed, the Apache pilot reported. You're clear to move. Extraction bird inbound, 30 seconds. 30 seconds. A lifetime and a heartbeat all at once. Monica emerged from the boulder's shadow, pistol raised, scanning the ridge out of habit even though the gunship had just annihilated everything in sight. The dust hung thick, glowing under sunlight, turning the air into a shimmering veil that felt almost peaceful, if one didn't notice the broken rifles or the scattered silhouettes beneath it. She turned, grabbing Davis by the straps of his vest. "Come on," she whispered, her voice cracking under the weight of fatigue she hadn't allowed herself to feel until now. "You're not dying on my ridge." She half-dragged, half-carried him toward the drop-off that descended into the wadi below. Her thighs screamed. Her arms trembled. Her vision swam. But she pushed through it, step after step, sliding down the rocky slope as the roar of helicopter rotors grew louder above her. A shadow swept across the wadi, sleek, angular, unmistakably urgent. The Black Hawk. It descended where almost no helicopter should ever attempt to land, skimming dangerously low between the walls of the wadi. The pilots were risking their lives for one thing. Sorry. She pushed harder. Gunfire erupted behind her, not suppressed, not disciplined, panicked. The enemy wasn't done. Two fighters, survivors of the Apache strike, stumbled onto the ridge, firing wildly in her direction. Rounds cracked into the rocks near her feet. Monica spun, adrenaline overriding exhaustion. Her pistol snapped up, shots ringing in the enclosed canyon. One fighter fell instantly. The second ducked behind a boulder and fired blind. She dove sideways, knees slamming into stone. Her hands steadied. Her pulse slowed. Shot. Silence. She didn't wait to confirm. She dragged Davis the last 10 meters toward the helicopter, as the crew chief leaned out with one arm extended. Come on, come on. Monica shoved Davis upward first, hands locking under his arms as the crew chief pulled him in. She reached up next, catching the grip, climbing as her body threatened to give out. The moment her boots cleared the doorframe, the pilot shouted, "Go, go, go." The Black Hawk surged upward, dust swirling into a violent storm beneath it. The wadi shrank away. The ridge retreated into distance. The chaos blurred into memory. Monica collapsed onto the cabin floor, coughing dust, blood trickling from the cut on her cheek. Her arms trembled uncontrollably now that adrenaline had loosened its grip. Her vision pulsed with a faint gray haze. But she was alive. Davis was alive. And the SEAL team, she saw them now, already on board, battered, bloodied, exhausted, yet looking at her with something approaching awe. Commander Morrison crouched beside her, helmet still on, his face streaked with grit and disbelief. "You're the sniper," he said quietly, "the one who saved us." She didn't answer. She couldn't. Not yet. Her lungs burned. Her eyes stung. Her throat felt tight, like emotion was trying to claw its way out from behind everything she'd held down. Morrison didn't push. He simply put a hand on her shoulder. "You didn't just save us," he said. "You kept us whole." Her gaze drifted to the open cabin door as wind poured through the frame. The battlefield below shrank into the vast Afghan landscape, sunlight washing over ridges that had witnessed violence older than any of them. She exhaled long and slow. And for a moment, just one moment, she allowed herself to feel what she had buried under duty. The ache of almost dying. The weight of nearly losing Davis. The cold realization that she had stood alone against an enemy who should have overwhelmed her. The quiet, unexpected pride that she hadn't broken. She didn't know yet what this day would become. A lesson. A legend. A burden. A door to something she never imagined. She only knew one truth. Sometimes surviving feels harder than fighting. The briefing room was colder than she expected. Not physically, air conditioners hummed with their usual indifference, but emotionally. The walls were painted in neutral tones that seemed designed to mute the world, the lights overhead a sterile white that washed out every trace of color. It felt like a place where truth was required to be objective, detached, stripped of the emotional gravity that had shaped it. Monica sat at the long table, straight back despite the ache in her muscles. 3 days had passed since the ambush, 3 nights of barely sleeping, 3 mornings of doctors asking questions she didn't feel like answering. Her shoulder still hurt from hitting the rocks. Her cheekbone was bruised. Her hands, though steady, still remembered the tremble that had finally caught her when the helicopter lifted her out of hell. Across the table, Commander Morrison stood beside a digital map, recounting every minute of the firefight with clinical confidence. He wasn't embellishing, wasn't dramatizing, wasn't trying to impress. He stuck to facts as precisely as she stuck to her shot placement. But every time he mentioned her, the room shifted, quietly, respectfully, like officers were subtly repositioning their understanding of who she was. Staff Sergeant Blake began engaging enemy positions at 13:52 hours, Morrison said, tapping a red dot on the screen. This first kill eliminated a PKM machine gunner suppressing our eastern wall. Without that window, we'd have lost our first casualty in under 30 seconds. Monica didn't move, didn't react, didn't look up. He continued. Over the next 30 minutes, she neutralized heavy weapons teams, snipers, RPG units, maneuver elements, effectively dismantling an entire ambush from a single overwatch position. 20 pairs of eyes drifted toward her. She kept her hands folded, kept her breathing steady. She didn't want praise. Praise dug into wounds she didn't know how to show anyone. The colonel from Army Special Operations leaned forward. "Staff Sergeant Blake, I'd like to understand your mindset during this engagement. What made you escalate your involvement?" Her gaze flickered toward him, calm, controlled, hiding everything she didn't want dissected. "They were dying," she said quietly. "I had the range, I had the shots. Waiting wasn't an option." He studied her like she was a puzzle piece that didn't quite fit the picture. "And when your position was compromised, standard doctrine dictates repositioning." "I know," she said. And yet you chose to stay. She didn't look away, because pulling back meant the wounded wouldn't make it home. The colonel's expression didn't change, but the silence in the room shifted slightly, dense, contemplative, something like reluctant admiration settling across the table. Morrison stepped in before the colonel could continue. Sir, with respect, she didn't choose recklessness. She chose responsibility. Monica almost flinched at that word. Responsibility. Her entire life had been built around it, being the one who stayed calm, the one who didn't break, the one who carried weight others weren't meant to feel. The colonel tapped a pen against the folder in front of him. Your skill level has raised some questions. His tone softened, not unkind, merely curious. Where did you learn to shoot like this? Monica hesitated, a faint, invisible crack in her composure. Her father. The competitions. The long car rides to remote ranges. The quiet afternoons where he taught her discipline, masked behind affection. The way he said, "You don't shoot to win, Monica, you shoot to be honest." She rarely spoke about him, even less so about what came after. My father competed, she said. Long-range precision, I grew up on the range. A simple answer, a small piece of truth, the only part she could offer without opening wounds she had no intention of sharing. The colonel nodded slowly. The marksmanship analysis described your performance as statistically improbable. 23 confirmed kills in under an hour at those ranges, under pressure, with a semi-automatic rifle. Not even trained special operations snipers typically exhibit that combination of speed and precision. Morrison turned toward her with a faint, knowing smirk. I told you, your after-action report is going to start arguments. If she had the energy, she might have rolled her eyes. But exhaustion held her still. The colonel reached into his briefcase and produced a sealed folder. He set it on the table and slid it toward her. We have a unit, he said, voice low, almost careful. Shadow operations, intelligence-driven, highly autonomous, unconventional. His eyes held hers. People like you excel there. People like her. People who didn't break under pressure. People who acted when doctrine failed. People who made hard choices alone. People shaped by something deeper than training. She didn't touch the folder. She wasn't sure if she was ready to. Later, outside the briefing room, Morrison caught up with her. The hallway smelled of dust and industrial cleaner, the lights flickering in their usual unreliable pattern. You did good in there, he said. I answered questions, she replied. Yeah, with more composure than most officers I work with. She didn't respond. He studied her for a moment, his expression softening, understanding something she hadn't said aloud. You know, he said quietly, when we were pinned, there was a moment I thought we were done. But then those shots started, clean, precise, and for the first time in my career I felt hope. He exhaled. Do you understand that? You gave us hope. Something tightened in her throat, something she didn't have a word for. Flattering, maybe. Terrifying, definitely. She wasn't sure which part hit harder, being recognized or being believed in. I didn't do it for hope, she said softly. I did it because you were out of time. Morrison smiled, not the cocky grin of a SEAL who'd survived another mission, but something genuine. That's what makes you dangerous. She turned away, unsure how to respond. Dangerous wasn't a compliment in her world. It was a warning. Later that night, alone in her bunk, she stared at the folder on her lap. The base was unusually quiet. No gunfire, no engines, just the faint hum of generators and the restless churn of her thoughts. She should sleep. She needed sleep. But instead she opened the folder, reading the first line. Selection is voluntary, failure is expected, completion is rare. Her hand hovered over the page as another memory surfaced, one she hadn't let in for years. Her father, sitting across from her at a shooting bench, saying, You don't chase greatness, Monica. You carry it quietly like weight on your back. She had spent years trying to decide if that was pride or pressure. She still didn't know. Never talk about what you do. Never expect recognition. Never expect forgiveness. Never expect home. The words stamped inside the folder were blunt, honest, demanding. Just like the life she had already been living. She closed it gently, her fingers lingering on the cover. Some things were doors. Some were traps. And some were promises. She wasn't sure which this would be. But she felt something in her chest, something almost like resolve, settle quietly into place. She had survived one ridge. She wasn't sure she'd survive the next. But she never walked away from challenges. And she wasn't going to start now. She woke before dawn, long before the rest of the barracks stirred. The base outside her window was still draped in pale, bluish half-light, the kind that made the world feel soft for a few fragile minutes before the heat and noise took over. Monica sat on the edge of her bunk, boots in her hands, staring blankly at the floor as if it might provide an answer to the question that had followed her through 3 nights of restless sleep. Was she willing to become something she couldn't explain? Someone she couldn't talk about? Someone she might not recognize in the end? The decision wasn't written anywhere, not in doctrine, not in the folder sealed with warnings, not in the eyes of the men she'd saved. The choice had to come from a place she rarely let herself look at. The quiet place. The honest place. The place where fear and ambition looked like twins. She laced her boots and stepped outside, the desert morning cold enough to sting her lungs. The compound stretched out silent and gray, except for the faint glow of lights in the training yard. Her body moved before her mind could catch up, habit, discipline, instinct, walking toward the only place that ever made sense when everything else felt tangled. The range. A single lane light flickered. The air smelled of oil and old brass. She set up a target without thinking, the ritual calming her heartbeat. She grabbed a spare rifle from the rack. The SR-25 was still being inspected after the mission, and settled into her firing position on the mat. The barrel was cold, the stock unfamiliar, but her breathing fell into its natural rhythm, shoulders relaxing as if the rifle itself were a language she could speak fluently even in her sleep. The shot cracked through the morning. One, then another, and another. Not rapid, not frantic, controlled, balanced, perfectly spaced. This was the quiet she needed. But the quiet didn't last long. A shadow drifted across the edge of the lane, heavy boots, confident stride, someone who simply didn't know how to walk without purpose. She didn't look up, she didn't need to. "You know," Morrison said, leaning against the barrier with arms crossed, "most people take their off time to sleep." Monica didn't stop firing, didn't answer, didn't break her rhythm. He waited, he always waited. 2 more shots, clean, precise. Finally, she lowered the rifle. "You need something, Commander." "No," he said, "just checking if you're okay." She blinked at him, slow, deliberate. "Why?" "Because everyone else has processed what happened on that ridge." He shrugged. "You're the only one pretending you haven't." She looked away. Morrison stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You acted alone. You fought alone. You nearly died alone. Doesn't matter how strong you are, nobody walks away from that without something." Her jaw tightened. "I walked away." "That's not what I meant, and you know it." She hated how easily he saw through her. SEALs were like that, too good at reading the room, too skilled at finding cracks in armor others didn't notice. Maybe that's why she found him easier to tolerate than most officers. He didn't hide behind rank or ego. He simply saw things, then said them. "You're thinking about that folder," he added softly. Her silence was answer enough. "Then read it again. But read it as the woman who carried an entire SEAL team on her shoulders for 45 minutes, not the woman who thinks she should have done more. Her eyes slid to the rifle on the bench. You think I'm punishing myself? I think you're avoiding the truth, Morrison said. And the truth is, there's nobody in this theater who could have done what you did. She inhaled sharply through her nose, the compliment landing like a weight rather than a gift. Be careful, Commander, she murmured. Sounds like hero talk. He smiled faintly. Maybe, or maybe I just call things how I see them. She didn't want to argue, didn't want to open the box inside her chest where conflicting thoughts kept clawing against each other. Instead, she reached for the rifle again. Morrison stepped forward suddenly and laid a hand on the barrel. Don't. Her eyes snapped up in surprise. Talk to me, he said, not as your as the guy whose life you saved. She exhaled slowly, tension draining from her shoulders. Her voice came out quieter than she intended. I don't know who I'm supposed to be next, she confessed. I'm good at what I do, but what if that folder turns me into something I never asked to become? A better version of yourself, Morrison asked. Or something broken, she countered. He held her gaze steady, unwavering. You're already carrying more than most people ever will, but you're not broken, he paused. You just survived something impossible and you're still trying to understand what that means. The words hit harder than she expected. She didn't cry, she never cried, but her throat tightened with the threat of emotions she didn't dare examine too closely. Morrison didn't push further. He stepped back, giving her space again. When you're ready, he said, you'll know. He walked away, boots echoing softly across the empty range. Monica stared at the target in the distance. The bullet holes were tight, clustered, perfect. Her hands didn't shake. Her breathing stayed calm. She survived the ridge. She could survive this decision too. But survival wasn't the same as clarity. Hours later, she found herself in the base gym, trying to burn through the thoughts she couldn't outrun. Her body moved on autopilot, push-ups, pull-ups, sandbag carries, the kind of training that forced the mind to surrender to muscle. Halfway through a weighted sprint, she stopped abruptly. Someone was waiting at the far end of the track, arms crossed, eyes sharp. The colonel, the same one who had slid the folder across the table. Monica wiped sweat from her forehead, breathing deeply as she approached. Sir, she said evenly. Blake, he answered, voice measured, walk with me. It wasn't a suggestion. They moved across the track toward a quieter corner of the gym, no one within earshot. You haven't decided yet, he said without preamble. No, sir. You're hesitating. Yes. Why? She thought for a moment, then answered with the kind of honesty she rarely allowed herself. Because I'm tired of only being called when things go wrong. The colonel's expression softened, not much but enough. You think that's what this is? She didn't respond. You're wrong, he said. We don't recruit people to fix broken missions. We recruit people who create outcomes no one else can. He studied her closely. Does that scare you? Monica looked him in the eye. Everything scares me. I just don't let it stop me. For the first time, the colonel almost smiled. Then you're exactly who we need. He handed her a smaller envelope this time, plain, sealed, unmarked. What's this? She asked. Your next decision, he said softly, and the last one you'll make as Staff Sergeant Blake. He walked away, leaving her standing in the fatting light of the gym, envelope held between fingers that had steadied rifles, carried wounded friends, and survived a ridge no human should have survived alone. Monica stared at it. The weight was unfamiliar. Not heavy. Not light. Just significant. She didn't open it. Not yet. She would. But first, she had to understand something deeper than training and duty and survival. Was she becoming this person because she wanted to? Or because the world had never let her be anything else? She tucked the envelope into her pocket. Another door. Another ridge. Another impossible shot waiting to be taken. She didn't open the envelope that night. She carried it in her pocket through dinner, through the long walk back to her quarters, through the quiet moment where she paused by the window and watched a dust storm forming on the horizon. She carried it like a pulse she could feel through fabric, a heartbeat that didn't belong to her but was slowly sinking with her own. The sun dipped behind the mountains. The sky dimmed to a muted violet. The base settled into an uneasy stillness. That familiar lull before darkness made every shadow feel alive. Monica sat on the edge of her bunk, elbows on her knees, staring at the sealed envelope. She knew she could open it, knew she could read the words inside and let them change the trajectory of her life. But something held her back, a whisper of hesitation, or maybe fear, or maybe the echo of a voice she only heard when she let herself be honest. You don't shoot to feel brave, Monica. You shoot because someone needs you. Her father's voice again, the same line she'd heard on the ridge when everything around her had narrowed to a single purpose. But this time, it didn't feel like advice. It felt like a question. Who needed her now? The base was quiet but not asleep. Men and women walked the hallways, boots clicking softly against concrete. Laughter drifted faintly from the wrecked tent. A radio played distant music. Somewhere, a helicopter landed, blades rumbling like distant thunder. Life continued, indifferent to the decisions she carried. She opened the envelope. There were only 4 lines. You have been recommended for selection. Report at 4:30 hours. Pack light. Tell no one. No signature, no seal, no explanations. She let out a slow breath, not relief, not dread, something in between. Something she had felt only once before, on the ridge, right before she'd made the decision to stay and keep fighting. Acceptance. The next morning she stood alone on the airstrip with a rucksack slung over her shoulder. Dawn had barely scratched the horizon, painting the sky pale blue. A transport plane hummed on the tarmac, ramp open, engines winding up. The cold air nipped at her cheeks. Morrison appeared from the shadows before she boarded. He wasn't in uniform. No helmet. No gear. Just a hoodie and the unmistakable look of someone who had pushed past rules to say one last thing. "Didn't think you'd actually go," he said. She adjusted the strap of her ruck. "You did." He chuckled. "Yeah," he admitted, "I did." She glanced at him, not long but long enough to read the gratitude in his eyes. Gratitude layered with something heavier, quieter. Respect that didn't need words. Understanding that didn't need time. "You're going to be incredible," he said. "Or I'll break," she replied softly. "Then break forward," he said. "Break towards something." The simplicity of it almost made her smile. Almost. She climbed the ramp. As the engines roared and the plane lifted off, she felt the base shrink beneath her, its memories, its battles, its ghosts. The ridge, the gunfire, Davis, groan. Morrison's hand pulling her onto the helicopter, the dust cloud swallowing the valley. All of it blurred together in a single breath she didn't realize she'd been holding until she finally let it go. Training wasn't what she expected. It wasn't shouting instructors or humiliation or endless physical punishment. It was quieter, more surgical, a dismantling, piece by piece, of everything she thought she knew about herself. 1 week in, she realized the instructors weren't judging her marksmanship. Anyone could learn to shoot. They were judging her silence, the way she held pain without showing it, the way she took responsibility she hadn't been asked to carry, the way she treated pressure not as threat but as invitation. They pushed her harder than she'd ever been pushed. Physically, yes, but mentally, that was where the real battle lived. There were nights she lay on her bunk, alone, lights off, the world outside humming in restless darkness, thinking she couldn't keep going, thinking this was the ridge all over again, except the enemy lived under her skin instead of on a hillside. But every time she almost broke, she remembered the SEAL in the helicopter, the wounded one who could barely sit upright yet had the clarity to speak truth through pain. "You saved us." And then Morrison's voice. "You gave us hope." She didn't believe it at first, but over time, she realized something she had never allowed herself to see. She wasn't surviving because she was strong. She was surviving because she refused to let others fall. That was her gift, her flaw, her burden, her purpose. And slowly, painfully, she began to lean into it. Selection lasted months, skills sharpened, edges hardened, weakness exposed. She learned to fall without fear, to move without hesitation, to shoot without doubt. And she learned something even more important, something her father's voice couldn't have taught her, something the Ridge had whispered but never explained. She learned that purpose was not a weapon. It was an anchor. Her instructors saw it before she did. One night, an older operator, a legend whispered about more than shown, pulled her aside after a long exercise. His eyes were tired, but his voice carried the kind of calm only earned through a lifetime of surviving the unforgiving. "You're not here because you killed 23 fighters," he said. "You're here because you stayed." She lowered her gaze. "You stayed when everyone else would have withdrawn," he continued. "You stayed when it was reckless, when it was impossible, when it might have killed you. That's what this unit needs. Operators who don't run from responsibility, even when responsibility hurts." She didn't reply. She didn't need to. He placed a hand on her shoulder. "And that is why you will pass." She did. The day she graduated, she stood under an open sky much like the one from the Ridge, blue, calm, deceptively gentle. She held the patch in her hand, fingers brushing over the insignia of a unit that officially didn't exist. A unit that would rely on her the way the SEALs had once relied on her rifle. Her new team stood a few feet away, watching her, assessing her, accepting her in their quiet, unspoken way. She wasn't the best shot among them. She wasn't the strongest, the fastest, or the most experienced. But she carried something they respected, something they needed. A willingness to act when action mattered. A refusal to quit when quitting would be easier. A silence that held more conviction than any speech. Later, alone again, she walked to the edge of the training compound and looked out over the empty desert. The wind tugged at her hair. The sky stretched endlessly above her. She closed her eyes, letting the weight of everything settle. She knew her life would never be simple, never be safe, never be normal. But she also knew something she hadn't known before. She wasn't meant for normal. She was meant for moments when the world teetered, when others faltered, when chaos demanded someone willing to stand still and steady. Someone who didn't speak loudly. Someone who didn't break easily. Someone who carried hope the way others carried weapons. She breathed deeply, the desert air cool against her skin. Sometimes dignity didn't shout. Sometimes courage didn't roar. Sometimes it simply acted. And sometimes, one person standing alone on a ridge, refusing to run, refusing to yield, refusing to let others die, was enough to change everything.